Have you ever known someone, whether you were close to them or they were just an acquaintance, and you had that first impression or that impression that develops over time as you get to know someone, and then through whatever means or circumstances you find out that there's something about their past or even as they currently are that if you hadn't already known them would have caused you to have judged them as being a bad person, but because you already have developed that connection and that knowledge of the personality and the way that they interacted with you, that you actually had a different opinion of them than you would have otherwise jumped to as a conclusion. Well, whether it's as severe as you met someone who you later found out was a murderer, that's quite an extreme example, or maybe they had stolen something and had gone to jail for it, or they were committed fraud, or whatever it was. It doesn't even have to be a crime. It could be just some sort of unsavory quality that you would have otherwise have judged them for. Maybe you found out that they were involved in some sort of lifestyle that you would otherwise have judged them for. But once again, you have a good view of them because you've gotten to know them. Well, that is something that I think a lot of people don't take into account when they consider things spiritually. So this is once again the wonderful topic of duality or polarity within the spiritual world. So a lot of people have this black and white view of good versus evil. And they think in terms of, well, there's all these things that we know are bad, and it's usually a hierarchy of like Satan, demons that control lesser demons that control lesser general demons, which control like hordes of peon demons or something. Then you have like God, angels, sub-angels, or I guess archangels, some other type of angel than the lowest angels. And it's basically like one pyramid versus the other, and it's like good versus evil, essentially. But really, if we consider what humanity looks like on the planet right now, you have hardened criminals, which if you were to meet them and they somehow were on your friendly side, could be some of the nicest people that you've ever met. And then you have, corrupt politicians who, at first appearance, might seem as if they have your best interest, but, they end up double-crossing you and taking away your rights, and they end up being the most psychopathic, sadistic, cruel, and don't care about you in the slightest types of individuals who, in the conventional terms, could be considered a good guy, but is in fact completely wretched and rotten to the core. So this isn't just about surface appearances, it's about understanding that there's a scale of, good qualities and unsavory qualities, and everyone fits somewhere along that line. And even then, there's multiple parts of our personalities and our ways of relating to people, and we're going to follow along that line differently with different people. And we can definitely say that, it's virtuous to, as a self-aware individual, to strive to be as best of a person as you can in all areas of your life and with everyone in your life. But I want to emphasize this point that we can't look to the spiritual world from this dualistic perspective, which is primarily religious in origin: Christianity, Judaism, Islam, etc., even Hinduism, which divides things into good and evil. We have to look at it as, what are the beings that, if we're talking about specific beings, what are their qualities, what are they known for? In the Goetia, which is a practice of evocation of certain entities, where there's a lot of protocols that you set up to make sure that whatever it is, whatever energy it is you're bringing into your presence is contained. You could almost think of it as you're like a journalist requesting an audience for it because you're making a documentary with some convicted killer. They might be renowned for these qualities which are unsavory, but in the right context, they're going to be cooperative. Of course, you want to have those things in place because they could be, and probably would be, dangerous if those weren't there. But that doesn't mean that there's certain aspects to that entity or that person, if we're talking about in real life, that person that, if you met them on the outside, it's very likely that they wouldn't display that malevolent side to you. It's all depending on context. But yeah, there's certainly the people who are in those places that we can say are completely gone bad in every aspect of the word, and they're usually the most psychopathic. But once again, we see statistically the most psychopaths exist in politics, high up in corporations, in the police force, and even in medicine. Those are the top, I believe those are the top 4, at least they're 4 of the top 10 careers with the greatest number of psychopaths in them. And if we're talking about lack of empathy and a willingness to do things that compromise other people's freedoms and rights and well-being for our own personal gain, that is really where our standards should be for determining whether something is worth having around us or worth allowing to be around us, whether it's worth letting it influence us. So you've heard me talk about scapegoats that religious ideologies have created in the past. I'll actually link to that video here. It's an older one I've done on this vlog. And it's important to recognize that a lot of these sort of maligned entities, figures that represent specific things, were, if we were to think of it like a culture had a relationship with an actual person, it's almost as if the culture drove that person to become something of an unsavory type. So what comes to mind perhaps is ancient Egypt and their very old god, Apep or Apophis. He was a snake god, and I forget the specifics of the mythology around him, but he came out of chaos, and he represented at the time darkness and all these things about chaos. And his polar opposite was, I believe it was Ma'at, and she represented order, light, etc. They're kind of dueling opposites, but at one point Apophis was ruler of the sun. He was the original sun god, and he got sort of kicked out of that role, and as a result he became the opponent of Ra. And every day as the sun would go underground in their mythology, Ra was battled Apophis. And Set is actually more well known as the devil of ancient Egypt, but Apophis was even worse, considered worse. And he actually held Apophis back from completely destroying Ra, the sun. So it's interesting to think of it as, there was this god that was not viewed as such a bad thing, but over time got turned into something that was bad. And the reason I'm partially thinking about this is just from the past weekend with Easter, etc. I learned about and kind of read up on the origins of the whole celebration. And we see Easter actually being originally a pagan tradition coming from Sumeria with the goddess Ishtar, and Ishtar became Astarte over time, and she became Astaroth, which was demonized in the Christian Bible. And this is just, again, in that context, it's a little bit more about Christianity subverting and repressing female sexuality, because that's what Astaroth represented, or Astarte was female fertility and female sexuality, which during springtime is the time of, to some degree in humans, that reemergence of those qualities. So again, we see this morphing of an individual being, sort of turned into a scapegoat, or used as a scapegoat for people's problems, and turned into a horrible being, or considered a horrible being by those people. So this is sort of a rambling video. I'm not trying to convey any specific intent or conclusion, but just wanted to bring up those points, and maybe they'll pique your interest in some way, or cause a shift in some way that you're thinking about these things. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll talk to you next time.